Harvard University has recently published an important study on gun violence in Chicago. They looked at data over the course of a generation collected from 2,418 residents between the years 1995 and 2021 to determine exposure to shootings by race, sex, and birth year. The idea here was to take a life course perspective, said Harvard professor Robert Sampson, one of the study's authors. When is exposure to gun violence happening? How does that change over the life course? And how do those patterns vary by race, sex, and all the societal changes that are happening? What they found, around half of Black and Hispanic respondents reported they had seen a shooting and were just 14 years old on average at the time they witnessed a shooting. Meanwhile, more than 7% of Black and Hispanic respondents each reported they had been direct victims of gun violence, shot for the first time at an average age of 17. So half had seen, Black and Hispanic kids had seen a shooting, average age 14 when they did. About a little over 7%, about 1 in 13 had been the direct victims, shot for the first time at an average age of 17. I mean, those are pretty depressing numbers, and they speak to what we mean when we talk about endemic violence in the city of Chicago. And while the study doesn't get into the repercussions of that sort of childhood trauma, there is a lot of sociological and psychological research on the traumatic and destabilizing impact of being in a violent environment as a kid. So this is sort of taking a step back and saying, how do we get to sort of a Hunger Games, Mad Max culture in the city of Chicago? Well, this is how. Generation after generation of kids coming up in a violent environment where they see horrific things that no one should see, much less 14-year-olds, that no one should experience, much less 17-year-olds. That is another part of the cultural problem that afflicts Chicago that is not easily fixed, particularly with political leaders like we've enjoyed over that time period and even go back 50 years before that play boogeyman politics and fail to address underlying culture, family culture, community culture, because they're too busy pursuing, prohibitions on the instruments of violence, confusing cause and effect. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by John Garrido, who is a former Chicago police lieutenant in the 16th District. He's also president of the Garrido Stray Rescue Foundation, garridostrayrescue.org, which is where I got my dog Hayek. So I can heartily recommend the Garrido Stray Rescue Foundation because they connected me to my great dog Hayek, who I love and who's been a blessing. John Garrido, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Morning, Dan. Thanks for having me on the show.
So what about that? I mean, you've experienced violence in terms of trying to stop it, trying to hold people accountable who've committed violence acts. You yourself, as a police officer, were the victim of violence. I know the story that you've told us. But I mean, do police? I mean, police see this. We're shocked when we hear about the 10-year-old carjacker, the 14-year-old kid who opens fire indiscriminately in a park in the city. But this has been going on for a couple of generations during which time you were Chicago police.
Sadly, I know the headline, says shocking, but it's like everything else. It's not shocking anymore. It's really become normalized, and it's especially become the violence has become normalized in a lot of these communities. I think it probably started when gang members started recruiting minors to help them with their drug trade and whatnot, because or hold the gun or hold the dope, because they knew that if they were caught with it, they were just going to get a slap on the wrist and put back out on the street. Well, that's evolved to using them because they're small to climb into buildings and homes for burglaries, and then it's gone on to now where you see carjackings. Adam Toledo, the 14-year-old, was out standing there on the street with an adult who was shooting at a car that was passing by. It's in the middle of the night at late hours, where the family but it's become so normalized that they think it's a game, and they're young. So these are young minds that aren't thinking with the possible rational mind of an adult. So for them, they're not thinking of repercussions. They're not worried or concerned about any type of accountability, because there usually isn't any. So it's like I said, it's just really become normal for them, and that's what's frustrating and sad.
Are these conversations that occur with an interagency, meaning Chicago Police, Cook County Courts, Cook County State's Attorney's Office, Mayor's Office, like where anybody is thinking globally about the kind of messaging that, at a minimum, the kind of messaging that should be delivered in a uniform fashion, addressing the cultural problems, the cultural rot in the city of Chicago?
No, there's not that kind of coordination at all. It's really just basically more responsive, right? We're just either putting Band-Aids on things. There's really no plans to come up with any type of solution or to get to the, as we hear already, the root cause of the problems. Right now it's just how do we just deal with and manage the wave, the surge, or the epidemic of crime that seems to be just surrounding us on a daily basis.
You're just a cleanup crew.
Yep, basically.
Mm.
And even within that, the agencies aren't working together. You've got the police go out, lock them up, try to clean them up, get them off the street, send them on. Then the state's attorney's office either charges them or doesn't charge them, and then they get whatever slap on the wrist when they get to the judges. So it's the whole system is just independent, and they kind of deal with it their own way.
Well, we saw that what we're talking about with the murder of Ariana Preston, Chicago police officer Ariana Preston. Assuming that those in custody are the responsible parties, they're alleged at this point, but one of the alleged assailants, this 19-year-old kid, is known in his neighborhood as the Bad Apple. You have residents saying, yeah, this is a kid who terrorizes the neighborhood. The neighborhood's better that he's not on the streets right now. And he's had again, according to the reporting, he's had half a dozen interactions with law enforcement. And by interactions, I mean arrests and adjudications. And here he is participating in the murder of a Chicago police officer. And I suppose that should come as no surprise anymore either.
No, you're right. And I'm hearing 3 have been charged this morning. I'm sure they'll be doing some type of press conference today about it. And you'll learn more about each of them. And they all have criminal backgrounds. And that's the problem. The system is a revolving door. They just go through, charges get dropped. Or if they'll arrest them for a felony, like the one guy, they'll arrest him for being in possession of a gun. He's taken to custody. He fights with police, spits at police officers, which are felonies in and of themselves, and the entire thing gets dropped. Even if they lose the case or drop the case on the gun charge, they could still lock them up for what they do to the officers, but that's just become part of the job, so to speak. So they're like, oh, well, we're not going to really charge that or pursue that, and they just walk out the door. Go out and become menaces.
What's the situation in the Chicago Police Department? I know you recently retired, but there's been a lot of ink spilled over the morale problem, the recruitment problem, perhaps barring some sort of paradigm shift in the approach that the mayor's office or the Cook County State's Attorney's Office takes to combating violent crime. What's going to happen in the Chicago Police Department, do you think?
Yeah, that's it. So we're losing over 1,000 police officers a year. 400 of them to resignations, and the rest to retirements and some early retirements. There's hope. There's always a hope with officers every time there's a shift. Even when Lightfoot came in office, every time a new mayor comes in, there's hope that is this going to be the time when things are going to become quote unquote legit, where they're going to actually take care of the department and take care of the officers, support the police officers, and actually put people in charge of the police department that know what they're doing. And usually every single time we're disappointed. there's that hope again. Based on what we've heard, it doesn't sound like that, so they're not less hopeful than they were prior to the results of the election. But they still remain hopeful because at the end of the day, officers want to do a good job. They're out there. They take this on not because they just want to be big bad and be the police. They're out there. They want to help people. They want to do a good job for the community, and they're often frustrated by politics, by the beat down that officers get, and they become just the fall guy for everything. Somehow the police have now become the problem instead of where the problem really exists.
Were you surprised? We talked to an officer a few weeks back. These 100 officers who signed a letter saying that had left to work in suburban departments and that decided that suburban policing wasn't for them. They want to come back to the city. And there was enough pressure put on Lightfoot that ultimately she acquiesced shortly before the April election. Were you surprised that there were 100 police that wanted to come back from suburban departments to the city?
It's a little bit, not so much, because this is what they do. This is what they've wanted to do. There's something to be said about just big city policing, the whole thing that goes with it. And I imagine they were probably pretty bored going to smaller departments, depending on how long they were on the job here before they left. And you always think the grass is greener when when you're going to leave. So wanting to come back, or maybe it's Stockholm syndrome. They just
Yeah, maybe there is a little bit of that. No, but I mean, I understand that there's a culture too. Especially a lot of these police are, second and third generation police, right? So this is part of their family identity, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. No, it's definitely a family. There, like you said, I remember when I came on in '91, sitting in roll call, and it was half the roll call was other police officers' kids that that are now coming up and carrying on the next generation. But sadly, that's part of the problem with recruiting, because that's a big part of the department is the generational aspect of the officers that are coming on. That's not happening. You've got now parents telling them or steering their kids away from law enforcement. Go do something else. Stay away from policing, or stay away from policing in Chicago. So that's actually part of the difficulty in recruiting new officers, because a big segment of that are the next generation isn't coming on.
What's your perspective on this migrant crisis, as Lori Lightfoot has termed it, saying we have no more room and so on and so forth? There's for example, a Venezuelan migrant has been arrested 3 times since he arrived in Chicago 3 weeks ago. The migrant crisis, as it pertains to what we may be experiencing over the summer with respect to the endemic violence that we've become accustomed to, as you were saying.
Well, it just goes to show that the whole idea of being a sanctuary city or a welcoming city is all talk, right? It's easy to say when you're 2,000, 3,000 miles from the border to say that you're a sanctuary city and you welcome everybody, but when they're now at your doorstep, there's no plan, and there never has been a plan. And we can even go further to say there has never even been a plan to deal with our homeless situation here in Chicago. Now you've got migrants that are sleeping in the stations that are actually displacing homeless people. We've got the homeless that are sleeping out at O'Hare and in tent encampments around the city. Homeless die every year, freezing to death. And we don't have a plan for them. And now we've got no plan for the migrants that are coming in. They're in every single police district in the city, sleeping on floors. People will bring food in, and they literally just gather around, and they're sitting and they're eating food on the floor. They're sick. I just spoke to a nurse at Resurrection Hospital and said one patient has TB. They're concerned that there's going to be an outbreak in some of these issues, just because they don't have the medical attention they need. And how it is that you can see the pictures that day after day we see these migrants are sleeping on the floor of police stations, and that's their plan. That's okay. Why wouldn't they have a big plan? Pritzker, what's he doing? He's the one at the top here in Illinois. I haven't even heard of him. Has he even done a press conference or news or said anything about anything? Mm-hmm. What is he doing to help with the situation? In the meantime, our officers that we need out on the streets are adding more officers to the desk to stay inside to deal with the migrant situation. Officers are actually bringing in clothes from their homes. They're giving them money. They're bringing in food for them, because once again, officers will step up and deal with the situation at hand, no matter what. But they shouldn't. That's not something that they should have to do.
You said police are optimistic. They're inclined to be optimistic when there's regime change, just because maybe this time.
Right.
What's your perspective on the incoming administration, the retirement of Kim Foxx, that she's not running again next year? What's your perspective? Is there based on the personnel that you've seen to start to be assembled? Is there reason to be optimistic about the city of Chicago?
We're always hopeful, right? As they say, you don't want the pilot to crash the plane. So fingers crossed, I guess. But it doesn't appear that way. Just the talk, things like don't demonize these, poor teens. When you can see, it's almost like, well, don't look at the video that you're watching of hundreds of kids running around and jumping on buses and destroying things in the city, and basically, property damage, hurting people, shooting at each other, ruining our tourism. And then with going over to the state's attorney's office, who's next? It seems like every single change comes in, the last one or the next one saying, hold my beer, while they just go on and become more destructive. So I don't even know who they're going to have replace Kim Foxx, or that anybody's going to get in that's going to do a better job. They seem to always get worse.
He is John Garrido, former Chicago.
You don't want to sound that way. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. You don't want to sound, all down on everything, but it's frustrating because it happens over and over and over.
Well, right. I mean, it's like, it's avert your eyes to what's happening, and just listen to what I'm saying. Just listen to the beautiful eyes. Don't actually take in what's happening. Well, that's not very compelling. No, I understand. John Garrido is former Chicago Police Lieutenant, 16th District, president of the Garrido Stray Rescue Foundation. If you're looking for a buddy, a pet, GarridoStrayRescue.org. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Dan. Bye.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
Listen to podcast of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Are you a driver of a Ford PowerStroke diesel engine? Tired of taking your Ford PowerStroke diesel in to be misdiagnosed or paying for repairs that don't fix the problem? Well, bring your vehicle to the diesel headquarters, Remke's Garage. The shop is equipped with state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment and highly trained technicians. Take it to the experts. Take it to Remke's Garage. Remke's Garage specializes in Ford PowerStroke, Chevy Duramax, Dodge Cummins, Mercedes Sprinter, and Isuzu diesel engines and transmission repairs. At Remke's, they'll make your vehicle repairs convenient by offering a free commercial loaner vehicle.
Remke's Garage, where you won't spend $1,000 to fix a $100 problem. Call for details and to schedule an appointment at 800-5-REMKES or visit Remke'sGarage.com. Remke's Garage, your diesel headquarters.
40 days up to 40 pounds. Say it with me. 40 days up to 40 pounds. With the warmer days of spring approaching, well, now here, you need to get rid of that oversized sweatshirt and reach out to NJ Diet. You lose a contractually guaranteed 20 to 40 plus pounds in only 40 days. There are no shots. NJ Diet